Google Gemini, well, Google in particular, Alphabet, the parent company, but Google, they are really going hard with this Gemini humanoid robotics breakthrough. And they've made some very significant advancements in what I would call general intelligence for robotics. Now, if you watched my predictions episode for 2025, if you haven't, go back and watch it. But if you watched it, you'll see that one of the things I have in there is some major advancements in humanoid robotics, and where we're going to start to see the intersection of AI and robotics come together. And this is one of those. So once again, just like last week, we're only in March, and some of these advancements are already hitting pretty hard. And what was unique about this was, so I watched the video of how their robots are learning and how Gemini is using these different things to accomplish what we often take for granted. So as an example, they were showing one of the engineers asking it to put a banana in a clear bin, but then they would move the bin as they would, the machine would try and pick up a banana and put it in, which sounds like such a small thing, because you would go, what's the big deal with that? Haven't robots been putting things, sorting things into a thing for a long time? Yes. And when you think about what it takes for it to not only recognize the original target it was supposed to put the thing in moved, but then to predict where that movement would be and to watch it play almost this game of cat and mouse of, okay, now I'm moving it over here, and it stops, pivots, moves, and does it in near real time. We don't realize, I think, many times how powerful our brains are and what we do, and things that we just don't think twice about. You know, something falls off the counter, we just don't even think to reach over without looking and grab it. That takes massive, massive amounts of brain power and complex general thinking that our bodies just do with little to no. We don't even have to think consciously about it. We just react and it happens. And so now these AI models are getting to a point where, as they move into multimodal territory and create new data about how things get done, we can start to train these things on this broad spectrum of data. And Google's really going firm with this. Now, I actually had another update that I keep bumping around that maybe I'll focus specifically on it depending on what happens. But Figure AI is another big humanoids robotic partner, and they are already saying they're planning on having consumer grade robots to help you around the house by later this year. And they're actually breaking away from some of the other big models, and they've created their own. Probably my guess is largely because a lot of the other big players have focused on language and language data, not necessarily contextual, real world data. And that's something that's a lot harder to capture. So of course, a robotics company is going to have more access to that. It would be easier for them to build a model capable of doing that better. But now Google's getting in the space. So clearly they haven't been sitting around waiting on this, because now their robotics are actually starting to do some of these general intelligence, which is its ability to, I just gave the example. Now, what's interesting about this is I fully anticipate we are going to see robotics start to explode on the scene here soon. Now, lest you freak out and think, oh my gosh, this means, there's going to be robots walking all over by the end of the year. I don't think we're going to see it move that quick. I think there's still a lot of risk that has to be mitigated. These models are still not necessarily, in very contained real world environments. They do fairly well. If you think about some of the things that we're seeing in military robotics, some of the risk is less. People aren't as worried about the risks. Not to say that the military doesn't worry about collateral damage. They do, but not the same way. Let's say if you're an office CEO and you're like, okay, well, if we have robots walking around the office, it'd be really, really bad if one of those robots like severely injured someone because it malfunctioned. It would cause absolute chaos. We'd have to do away with our entire investment. In the military, if a humanoid robot accidentally, friendly fires somebody or hits a civilian, it's just not going to be taken as seriously, because it's kind of considered, well, that's the cost of warfare. So that's why I say I don't think we're just going to suddenly start seeing robots popping up all over the place, but this space is moving ridiculously fast, ridiculously fast. And I do think we are going to start to see consumer robotics this year. I do think we are going to start to see those pop up. I think the costs are going to start to come down. They're finding ways to make them vastly more efficient through electronic motors versus the big hydraulic systems that historically they've relied on, that are very heavy, very hard to take care of, have a lot of issues with them. For anybody who's ever worked on hydraulic systems, I used to do construction, and they're a maintenance nightmare to deal with this stuff. They're great when they work, but when they don't, it's a real problem. And so these electronic motors are reducing the footprint, the risk associated with it, because instead of these big, powerful hydraulic systems, they can do it in smaller, less dangerous systems. So we're starting to see that. But now this week, the one I really wanted to focus on was Google has really made some progress in the AI models, which will now allow these things to operate much more human-like than a robot. And the example I shared, if you go look it up, I can't remember. I think it's AI Grid is one of the YouTube channels I follow that went through this, and they did a breakdown on it. It's very interesting to watch. Now, granted, it's two arms on the end of a table. So you still have a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. Just because I don't know a lot of people whose houses have just a table where they can have two robotic arms set up and have it do things. But you can start to see the potential for, if you were to train something like that on cooking, there's a real world where it isn't that far out to think that you could have an AI trained robot in your kitchen preparing meals very easily. To me, that's something that is extremely practical and something that wouldn't be that hard. I can see some of these households, and I'm just thinking as a dad of 8 and husband, some of the just practical stuff, washing dishes, sorting cabinets, going through and rearranging. I mean, who likes to rearrange their spice rack or their cereal cabinet to make sure that nothing's expired and the boxes are all what? These are real world activities that a robot could probably do fairly well today with some of these things, and do it with the kind of general intelligence that if your kid jumped in front of the cabinet, the robot's not going to just, jam its hands into the kid's face, because it can now detect what's going on and adapt in real time. If it's cooking food on a counter and suddenly your kid puts their hand on the counter, it's not going to take the knife and chop off their fingers, because it'll be able to detect that, hey, something changed. I need to pivot course, which sound like very basic things, but to a robot, that is very complicated. That is a lot of advanced general intelligence that they have to be able to make those kind of decisions and recognize that. But you can also start to see, as I'm describing this, why there's a lot of risk that these companies have to consider as they think about, all right, before we sell a consumer grade robot into somebody's house, we have to make sure it can handle and think about all these distractions. What happens when the cat jumps up on the counter and walks across? Like, does it know what to do with that? Does it know that the cat didn't become an ingredient in your recipe? Does it know that it needs to now sanitize, the counter because there's cat hair? Like, how does it start to think about some of those things? Now, granted, people aren't perfect either, but there's so much stuff that we just do intuitively because we have such general intelligence that a robot just doesn't have. But this breakthrough with Google's Geminis is starting to show how much further we are coming with this. The days of, well, we can train a humanoid robot to literally pick up one panel, move it, place it on a thing, put the same things in, and it can really only do very repeatable, consistent tasks. Watching this video of Google Gemini's new robotics breakthroughs is proving that that's not necessarily the case at all. And we are not far off from being able to do far more than that. Now, one of the things that comes up with this that was really interesting, I was talking with my kids about it last night, was, doesn't this further disrupt people's identity in terms of oh gosh, what makes us human and all this other stuff? And we happened to watch this video from, I can't remember what it was. It's called Kierkegaard's, something like that. It's European, the name of the channel, but they do these animated videos, and they were talking about how you actually aren't experiencing reality, you're experiencing your mind's prediction of what reality is. And it was just talking about all the way our senses detect and predict and all this stuff that we just take for granted, which if you want to understand the complexity of what these AIs have to learn and how wonderfully complex we are as human beings, just go look up that video. They just dropped it this week. It'll make your head spin. You'll feel a little dizzy after you watch it, I promise. But what was really unique is as they broke this whole thing down, they got to the end of it, and their whole point with it was, so like, does this just mean we're nothing but a bunch of, neural synapses and electronic whatever? And could we ultimately just replicate all they didn't get into that, but that was the discussion I had with my kids is, well, couldn't we just replicate all these things and essentially create a human being? But it was interesting because at the end, even they acknowledged no, because there is something unique about human consciousness. Now, they don't subscribe to my worldview, so for them, they just kind of stopped there and were like, we don't know what it is, but we just know it's there. So for me, it's very much I firmly believe I do know what that is and what contributes to that. So no matter how advanced these models get, we're not creating a human being. Even if we can get it to replicate all of the activities of a human being, even if we can get it to learn all the things a human could theoretically learn, we still are not creating a human. But what we're starting to see is some of these advanced capabilities are going to very, very, very much mimic and mirror a robot or a human in ways that we just can't fully predict at this point. But it's going to be very interesting to watch. And I stand firm. I said I'd throw updates in along the way just to kind of let you know how things are progressing on my predictions. And advanced robotics, for sure, this year is going to be a major, major one.